Good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the 8th Annual Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I'm Jean Anderson with the South Central Library System, and I'm moderating the Small and Mighty track today. Assisting me this morning is Joy Schwartz with the Winnifox Library System, and we are so glad to have you here. Our presenter for this session is Lauren Stara. I hope I said that right, Lauren, Library Building Specialist with the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, and she will be presenting Making the Most of the Space You Have. So Lauren, whenever you are ready, go ahead and begin.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Joy, and thanks to everybody at the Wild Wisconsin Conference who invited me to present today. My name is Lauren Stara, and I am a fairly specialized person. I am what's called a library building specialist, and I work for the state agency, the State Library Agency in Massachusetts, which is the mouthful of Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. I've been here since 2013. Before that, I was a library director in small libraries in first Washington State and then British Columbia. Before that, I was a reference librarian in a small town in Colorado. And before that, I was a library clerk and a IT person at the public library. I was a ski bum before that. And before that, I was a practicing architect, and I did most of my architecture work for Walt Disney Imagineering in Southern California. This presentation was originally developed for the Association of Rural and Small Libraries in Vermont last September. So the main focus is on small public libraries, but I think the information can be extrapolated to other venues as well. I'm not sure, Jean, are most of the participants here public libraries, or are they multi-type?
Most of them, I believe, are public libraries.
Okay. Excuse me. All right. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is, there we go. I'm going to take a poll, and Jean is going to help me with this. And here's my question. Do you have enough space in your library?
All right, I just launched the poll. So hopefully everyone is seeing that. So go ahead and use the poll to submit your answer. And then once everyone has, or most everyone has voted, I will close the poll and share the results with Lauren. And in the questions, I'm seeing lots of no's as well. So in addition to the poll responses, we will have more no's. So we've got about 80% voted so far. I'll just let it go for another few seconds.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. We're at about 81% plus all the no's in the chat. So hold on one second. And I'm going to share the results. I don't know that you're seeing these, Lauren, but of the 3 responses, 13% said we have plenty of space, but it needs reconfiguring. And there's a tie for 44% for we have enough for what we do now, but not for new services, and we are bursting at the seams. Those are a tie.
Okay. All right.
So I'll go ahead and hide the results, so you should have control of the screen again.
All right, thank you. I'm pretty sure you know that these answers are not a surprise to me. I think I've seen in my career one library that has enough space, and I've seen hundreds of libraries. So all of us are struggling with providing new services and dealing with all of the things that we're doing now. In order to figure out how to address your space, I want you to think about the kinds of spaces you have, because it's not just one big blob of space in a library. So, of course, we have public space, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Everybody who works in a library understands what the public space is. We have staff space, and that's pretty cut and dried also. But there's other kinds of space too. There's what I call the in-between spaces, like your service desks. They're kind of public and kind of private, you know, depending on which side of the desk you're on. There's also, let's say, a kitchenette that you might have adjacent to your meeting room or your community room, and that's really kind of staff space, but sometimes the public uses it. So I call those in-between spaces. Storage, there is never enough storage. And that's an important thing to think about when you are doing library planning. Other kinds of spaces from the architect's point of view are called unprogrammed spaces. And those are things like stairs, hallways, mechanical spaces, and restrooms. And these are the spaces that all buildings have. They're not just library related spaces. And believe it or not, these unprogrammed spaces take up around 30% of your square footage. We all know that library services are changing really, really quickly, and the services we provided 30, 20, 10, even 5 years ago are not what we're doing now. I'm pretty sure everybody here has some kind of service they would like to provide, but they're unable to find the space to do it in. All right, now I'm going to tackle the elephant in the room, clutter. It is a law of nature that stuff expands to fill space. These are some photographs from a library in a small town in Massachusetts, and I'm not going to name it. It's a town of less than 600 people, and it's located in an old classroom in a high school building shared with town offices. It's only open 12 hours a week. The librarian has no money and no support from the town. But what she does have is a habit of rescuing stuff from the transfer station and bringing it back to the library. This is a room of just over 1,000 square feet, and there is stuff everywhere. There are 6 sofas in this space. 6 sofas. Why? There is so much stuff, both physical and visual clutter. Your eye has nowhere to rest when you're in this room. You can't see anything. Now, this is an extreme example, and I'm not saying that this librarian is wrong or bad for doing this. My point is that we as librarians are collectors. We tend to be collectors anyway. We like to collect stuff, we like to organize stuff, and we don't like to get rid of stuff that might be useful someday. And I want to emphasize that phrase, it might be useful someday. I'm going to ask you to embrace your inner toddler and say no. Librarians tend to do more with less, to try to present their best face to the public and to minimize problems. But I believe truly that we have to learn that we can't be all things to all people, and we have to prioritize. We have to learn to say no. We have to say no to the nice old lady who wants to donate her beloved collection of tchotchkes to the library. And we want to say no, we have to say no to the outraged patron who demands that we never weed old, out of date, or unused items from the collection because books are such precious objects. No to the children's librarian who keeps 20-year-old decorations, toys, and craft supplies because she might be able to use them someday. We simply don't have the luxury of space to keep things that we don't need. So my first tip is to do a ruthless clear out of your space. It's like your closet. If you haven't used it, if you haven't worn it in 3 years, get rid of it. If you have chairs that are uncomfortable or worn, get rid of them. If you have a technology graveyard, get rid of it. Find the next electronic recycling day and get rid of those things. If you have old collections of stuff that were donated sometime in the midst of time, Try to find out what the conditions of the donation were and whether you have the ability to either redonate them to, let's say, a historical society or a museum, or if you can get rid of them. These photographs are two of my favorites. The one in the upper left is a collection of stuffed birds from the Victorian era that were actually preserved with arsenic. So these are stuffed birds filled with arsenic, and they are in plastic bags on a shelf in the basement of the library. Why? Why have they not gotten rid of these things? The one in the bottom left is a room that is probably half again the size of the entire library collection area. That is a shrine to an old woman's tchotchke collection and scrapbooks. You can see the scrapbooks in the middle. And because the library trustees don't have documentation of the conditions of this donation, they feel like they cannot get rid of this stuff or reuse this room for let's say, a more functional use. I want to give you one caveat. I'm sure most of you know that your city or town may have bylaws or procedures for getting rid of public property. Unless it's truly broken and worthless, you can't just put it in the dumpster. And if it's truly broken and worthless, you shouldn't have it anyway. A special note about library collections. This is probably the most difficult topic in public libraries right now, because determining how big your collection should be is such a huge question mark with digital materials and cooperative collections. How do you determine how many books should be on your shelf? And this is where your priorities come in. Every public library should have a written and approved collection development policy that spells out their priorities and their retention rates. If you don't have one, you need to talk to your trustees about writing and adopting one, and take a really hard look at your collection. What is actually circulating? What should you keep on your shelf? How often are your reference books really used? Do you have encyclopedias and series of reference books that are never used? How many years of magazine back files should you really keep? And if you are, I don't know what Wisconsin's cooperative borrowing situation is. We have statewide cooperative borrowing in Massachusetts. So, you know, I always say to librarians, do you really need every Nora Roberts book sitting on your shelf when you can get it for in 2 to 5 days from another library? Or if your patron can drive 5 miles down the road to the next library and pick it up there. Tailor your collection to your community. These are a way to broadcast your message and your vision. And any collection development policy should be reviewed regularly and used as a daily tool, not as a dead document that sits on your shelf. Okay, how do you find more space? Excuse me. There are 3 basic ways to gain space for new services. One is to actually get more space, to increase the library's footprint in some way, either an addition of some kind or a new facility. Then there's repurposing space, which means getting rid of unnecessary stuff and changing the function of an underused space. Or make existing space more flexible so that it can be used for more than one function. Repurposing space. First, getting more space. I'm assuming that most of you are here because building a new building is not in your near future. Most libraries cannot afford to undertake a major construction project. So I'm assuming that that's not where you are. repurposing space. So this is one of my favorite pictures. It's a picture of a giant bank of vertical file cabinets. Now, when I was a new reference librarian in 1991, vertical files were very important tools. But are they that important now? If there are unique items or resources that can't be found online or in another location, can they be scanned and be made available digitally? What other space hogs do you have in your building that you could possibly convert to either digital or another format? So back to cleaning out the closet. Get rid of what you don't need, including furniture, supplies, and collections. On the right, the two photos on the right are pictures of what used to be a storage closet. And this is in a very small library in Western Massachusetts, and they got rid of all the old junk that was not being used, and they were able to convert this closet into a children's room. Now, it's a tiny little children's room, but it is a space for the children's collection and a little table and chairs. They were able to cut a window in the wall, and they got someone, I don't know who, to paint this amazing Dr. Seuss mural on the wall, and it's a beautiful little space. The photo on the left is another children's room where they needed a desktop computer station, and they just found a spot on the wall and put up this little shelf, and it took up very little space, but it is a fully functional computer workstation. I suggest that you do a 2-week sweep study of your library, and what that means is every hour for 2 weeks, have someone walk through the library and record exactly what's happening in the library. What pieces of furniture are being used, what they're being used for, what kind of equipment is being used, and I guarantee that you will find some items that are never used and could be candidates for discarding. This is an example of what I call extreme repurposing, and this is a room called the Idea Box, and it's located in the Oak Park Library in Illinois. It is a room that is literally changed I'm thinking it's every month, although I'm not 100% sure about that. But they use this room for any purpose that they can think of. The large photo on the right is a blind date with a book configuration. The one on the upper left is when they were thinking about doing some changes and wanted to do community engagement. So they just allowed people to write down their thoughts on Post-it notes and stick them on the wall. And the one on the lower left is where they painted all the surfaces, including the floor, with blackboard paint and let people go crazy. This is another example of that kind of thing on a smaller scale. This is in Waltham, Massachusetts, where they had a small room they called the pie room because it's triangular in shape. And it really wasn't a well-used space. They didn't quite know what to do with it. And they came up with the idea of dressing it up in different themes. They do 3 themes per year, and these are photos demonstrating how they did in the jungle, under the sea, on the farm, around the town, in the classroom, and at the theater. And these are all very inexpensive. You can see in the center there, that's a big tree, sort of a tree playhouse made out of cardboard boxes and packing paper. They really have a very small budget for these things and do it on the cheap, but they do a really good job. If you have an unused space and you want to think about doing something like this, something that you need to understand is that this is a true commitment of staff time, and it really takes dedication and sort of a small team of people who are really dedicated to doing this and keeping it up. Okay, now on to from repurposing to doing multi-use spaces. So I'm a big proponent of making your space work as hard as you can. The upper photo is a picture of traditional stacks, fixed steel stacks, and the lower photo is a picture of mobile stacks that can be moved around. Flexibility is probably the #1 thing that I talk about when we're planning new or reconfigured libraries. And flexibility isn't just about putting wheels on everything, although that can help. Flexibility is also not just physical flexibility of furniture and equipment, but also flexibility as a mindset of thinking of how you can be creative in using your space. One of the things that I see very frequently is the use of the main service desk or circulation desk as a barrier between staff and patrons. And in general, the trend in public libraries is to more staff and patron interaction. Think about how in the old days, all the stacks used to be closed. The librarians were guardians of the books, and we're slowly moving away from that. And the trend is to a smaller, more nimble service model where service points are really stations where staff can be found, and they're sort of home base, but they're moving around throughout the space. So these are monumental or desks as wall, as I call them, they serve as a physical and psychological barrier between the staff and the patrons. These are some examples of smaller service desks. The one on the upper right it's still pretty traditional in layout. It's linear, like the one on the upper left. But what I like about it is it's open on both sides, so it's easy to come out from behind there and help people. And also the fact that the work surfaces are adjustable in height, so that's good for both handicapped accessibility and for staff ergonomics. So people can set the height of the table to either sitting or standing height, or if you're short, you want it lower. If you're tall, you want it higher. You can make it however works for your body. The 3 examples on the bottom, the one on the left is Edgartown, Massachusetts. The one in the middle is Santa Monica, California. And the one on the right is the Dayton Central Library in Ohio. So these are all smaller service desks. And they're also, for the most part, they are not built into the floor. They're not bolted down. So if you need to move them, you can. All right, multi-use space. So you want to try to choose equipment and furnishings with flexibility, portability, and storability in mind, because keep in mind that if you have a space that wants to fulfill 2 or more functions, then all the equipment and materials that work for one function have to be moved out and stored somewhere for the second function to work. So think about this. Do you have a separate local history room that is basically a locked room where your local history materials are kept? If so, evaluate what you have in that collection. Think about what's truly unique and special to your community and what is just kind of filling up space. Think about putting that material in a locked display cabinet or a ventilated archival cabinet. And then you can use that space as either a group study room or a quiet room. Most of us know that noise in libraries is a huge problem because most libraries were built when the library culture was that you were silent. you were quiet. Libraries were expected to keep people quiet, and it's just not like that anymore. And yet there's a significant number of people that come to the library wanting a quiet space to study. So we have to provide that somehow. The way I say it is, in the old days, you used to have to find a special room to make noise in the library. Now you have to find a special room to be quiet in the library. So let's see. Flexibility, as I said before, is the #1 principle in planning a library today, because think about how much your library services have changed in the last 10 years. And we have no idea how it's going to change in the next 10 years. And we have to poise ourselves to be ready for all kinds of change. So having things that can be moved around easily and stored compactly is important. So the most obvious way to inject flexibility into your space is mobile furnishings. Shelving and furniture on wheels is a huge trend. Adding mobility to furniture makes it possible to clear out a space previously locked in to just collections and use it as a program space. There's 2 photos here, the lower left and the upper right, that have chairs and tables next to small portable walls. And this is something that's not directly related to flexibility, but it's something that's important to keep in mind. Look at that photo in the upper left-hand corner and imagine those tables sitting in the middle of that space without those whiteboards. It would be sort of like a giant cafeteria, and it would not be a comfortable place to sit, at least for me. I think most people don't like sitting in the middle of a large open space. But just providing that little vertical surface next to the table makes it so much more inviting. It's human nature to want to stay next to the wall. It's a safety mechanism, and we have to pay attention to that. By the way, I meant to say earlier that if anybody has any questions, please type them into your chat box or whatever you have, and Jean will relay them to me. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go along.
I just have a comment that was a good segue into this. Paula says she's been to a library who have tabletops made out of whiteboards.
I have a couple pictures of those coming up.
Awesome. And then one other comment earlier with the vertical files, yep. Meredith says, if referring to original materials and file cabinets, best archival practices dictate that the originals be kept, although they could be scanned and then maybe transferred to a more appropriate archive location, like you mentioned earlier with an archival file cabinet or whatever you mentioned about archival materials.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I'm not advocating getting rid of any important historical or unique materials. It's just thinking about how you store them. How often are they used? Do they need to be out on the main floor? Can they be in a locked cabinet somewhere so that you have a little more flexibility with the use of the space?
Excellent. Thank you.
So these are 2 pictures of the library in Whistler, British Columbia, where I was library director until 2012, and we opened a new building in 2008. This building was too small the day we opened, and we knew it was going to be too small the day it opened. And the thing that saved this is that it's an L-shaped building, and one whole leg of the L is filled with these mobile shelves that can be easily moved. I personally, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows of 3 gondolas each, and I can personally move all of those shelves out of there in 15 minutes easily. It's a little harder to put them back after the event is over because you have to line them up, but it's it's really easy to reconfigure this space. The meeting room in this library only has a capacity of 62 people, but with this whole wing, when we move those shelves out of there, we can easily accommodate 300 or more people. And we had a cocktail reception in here, we had a First Nations dance performance, and we also have had several concerts in this space, and people absolutely love it. The thing that works with this is that the other wing that is off to your left in this photograph has standard fixed shelving, and when you move these mobile shelves out, you slot them in between those fixed shelves. So, and they all fit very easily. Size matters. I have found from personal experience as a library director and now as a library building consultant that the quality, if you're going to go with mobile furnishings, the quality of your casters is paramount. If you get little, small, cheap plastic casters, they will break, and either they will break or it will be very hard to move the piece that they are attached to. And when something is hard to move, then it doesn't get moved. It's just too much trouble. So why go to the expense of buying mobile furnishings when you don't move them? So in general, the larger the caster, the easier it is to move those pieces. Each of these gondolas, they're 4 feet wide, and they have a large 5-inch caster on each corner, and there's also a fifth caster in the center of the unit, which makes it much easier to steer when you're moving it around. So my recommendation is, if you're looking at buying mobile shelving, don't take any salesman's word for how easy it is to move. Either go to the showroom and move one of these things around yourself, or find a library who has purchased these items and either go there and move it around yourself, or talk to the people who have personal experience with them, because ease of motion is paramount. So don't skip on your casters. Don't skimp on your casters. These are two examples of libraries who have converted existing furniture with adding casters to them. So the lower left is pretty self-explanatory. It's I personally think these shelves are a little tall for casters, but it seems to work for this library. So these were existing wooden shelves that they actually had somebody install casters on the bottom, and they can move these around. I don't think they move them very often because this is going to be fairly unwieldy. Anything taller than about 5 feet is a little questionable in terms of making it mobile. But my favorite one is these big wooden library tables, and you can see in the lower right-hand photograph, these are casters that are on hinges. So when they're in place, you pull the casters up so the library legs sit on the floor. But when you want to move them, you step on this little pedal and it lifts the table off the ground, and you can move this giant wooden table around fairly easily. And the librarian told me she found these on Amazon. Technology. How many of you have a whole bunch of desktop computers that take up a whole lot of room? We all know that mobile devices are becoming more and more pervasive, and mobile devices take up a lot less space than a big desktop computer. A lot of libraries are loaning out either laptops or tablets or both for use within the library, and there are a lot of different ways to do this. On the upper left is a fairly expensive but self-service solution where library patrons use their library card to borrow one of these devices, and it's it's programmed to be usable for a certain number of hours or whatever time limit you set, and then at the end of that time the device becomes unusable and they have to return it to the slot. The photograph in the center is a really compact wall rack for charging laptops that is in the back of house space, the staff workroom in a library in South Carolina, and those are used for loan to patrons with staff interaction. It's not a self-service thing. The lower left shows a mobile laptop charging cart. So that is something that you slot the laptops in. So you only have to plug it in one place, and then the cart does the charging for you, and you can move this between a secured location and a public use location. And the photos on the right are showing how you don't need to devote an entire workstation, sit-down workstation for your catalog lookup functions. These are tablets that are mounted either to a column or to a stack end, and they have touch screens and people can look up things there. And that is a much smaller footprint for OPACs or catalog lookup computers, whatever you call them in your library. Always think about ways for spaces to serve more than one purpose. So this is, most of you are probably familiar with flip-top tables, but the picture on the bottom shows that flip-top tables don't just come in rectangular. These are fairly large square tables that are flip-tops. The right-hand photograph shows a cart for a 3D printer. If you have a makerspace, I do not advocate dedicating a space to one function. So if you want to have a makerspace, make sure that all the equipment is movable and flexible. You can take it out and use the room for a conference room or something else when it's not being used for actual makerspace activities. Oops, did I skip? Oh, I skipped a page. What kinds of seating do you have? We always advocate having a variety of seats for any public space. Keep in mind that people want to feel like they're at home. If they're at home, then they'll hang out and spend more time in the library. If all you have is 4-person work tables, then maybe they'll be used for homework or office type functions, studying. But people, especially with mobile devices, they like more comfortable chairs. So having a variety of types of seating is important. Also keep in mind that you have to accommodate all different body types. You have to have a furniture that's comfortable for short people, tall people, big people, small people. And I recommend that you never buy a chair without sitting in it yourself and having a short person sit in it and having a tall person sit in it, because chairs, especially commercial grade furniture, which is what we recommend for libraries, is expensive, and you don't want to invest $800 to $1,000 in a chair and have it be uncomfortable and people will never sit in it. The upper left is the traditional library table that probably everyone here has. And I'm sure that you've had the experience of having one person sit at this table and nobody else will sit there. Multi-seat tables are good for teen rooms and maybe 1 or 2 in an adult space. but people tend to work individually in libraries. And so the solution, a good solution can be seen on the upper right, where it's the same size table. It's a 4-person table, but they have these acrylic dividers. So it gives a sense of privacy, and people are more likely to sit next to one another if they have that degree of privacy. Excuse me, the table, the 2 photos on the bottom are showing a round table that was retrofitted with dividers for computer workstations. So you don't have to buy these tables already designed with these partitions. You can install the partitions afterwards. Of course, the possibilities are endless in children's rooms. You can just make your imagination run wild. 2 of my favorites on this page are the upper left, the Lego wall. If you don't have room for a Lego table, put some Lego on the wall. And the one on the upper right, which is a magnetic surface. So it's a magnetic surface that's painted with blackboard paint. So it can be used both for magnets and also to draw on with chalk. And then for teen rooms, again, the upper left is showing a window where the kids can use markers to do their temporary graffiti. The upper right is showing a teen space that was literally carved out of a stair landing. It's as simple as a couple of chairs and 2 shelves added onto the wall. And the lower right is showing those whiteboard tables that the kids love to draw on, and it's so easy to just erase them and make them clean for the next day. The lower left shows a teen space that's fairly small, but it has bright colors. It has a purple floor. It has that orange mobile cabinet. It has natural light, which is important, and it's a space that kids can really take ownership of. All right. I mentioned noise as one of the big problems in libraries today, and this is another one, power. Most libraries that were built more than 20 years ago have very few electrical outlets, and the demand for charging stations is huge. So there are a lot of alternate ways and creative ways to provide power for your patrons. The upper left shows these portable chargers that can be borrowed from the desk and used to charge up devices anywhere in the library. The lower left is probably not the most aesthetic solution, but it certainly works. It's a big oak library table, and they just screwed a power strip right to the top of the table, and the cord, as you can see on the right, runs down that carved leg and into a floor box. The one on the right is another retrofit of a historic library carrel with just that sleek little box with 3 outlets and 2 USB ports that's just installed right at the desktop. So providing power and data, well, not data so much now that we have Wi-Fi, but providing power and both power outlets and USB outlets at the tabletop is way safer than having people string their power cords across walkways and people trip over them, and it's a big mess. So this is lighting. Many libraries, I'm not going to say most, but many libraries have sort of the uniform wash of fluorescent lights throughout their space, and that is a fairly inefficient way to light your library, both collection and workspace. So having light that falls on the surface, like lamps on a library table, is a much more efficient way of lighting a space. The photos on the left show lamps that are on a table, and the one on the bottom shows that there's power outlets in the base of the lamp. So it's dual purpose. It provides task lighting and also power at the tabletop. And the photos on the right show LED lights that are installed at the top of a shelving unit. So it provides a wash of light down the spines of the books. So the light is where you need it, not way up in the ceiling. A lot of libraries are converting now to LEDs because they have become a lot more a lot better quality in terms of the color and consistency of the light, and they're much more less expensive now. And a lot of energy companies are providing incentives to convert public buildings from fluorescent or incandescent over to LEDs, and you can save some energy costs that way. And then I talked about acoustics before. There are some ways to mitigate the reverberation of sound around your library. Most libraries were not built with noise in mind, and there's a lot of echoing and sound transmission between spaces because nobody thought about noise in libraries when they were built. So there are several ways to mitigate that. This is showing some acoustic tiles that you can put on the walls to deaden the sound. Anything made of fabric or felt will absorb sound. So on the left, that's a portable divider screen that's made of corrugated felt that will absorb sound. The photo on the right shows some felt dividers that kind of turn a laptop bar into carrels, individual carrels, so they provide privacy and sound absorption. And then at the top, that's a picture of the emitters that are part of a sound masking system that you can install if sound masking is, the old name for it is white noise. It's actually not white noise. It's a wide range of frequencies that are emitted from these transmitters. And what happens with them is it makes speech unintelligible. So even though you hear people talking and you know people are talking, you can't understand what they're saying, and that makes it less obtrusive in your space. So those are especially valuable in quiet study areas. So any noise that comes in through the walls, it becomes unintelligible and less distracting for people.
Lauren.
Yes.
Paula says to make sure you don't paint the acoustic tiles. She knew one place who did, and then they no longer worked. So
absolutely, that's a very good point. When you get acoustical materials, it's important to not compromise the integrity of the acoustical properties, and any kind of painting will destroy those properties. Thank you, yeah. Paula.
Yes, thank you for sharing that.
All right, another huge trend in libraries is self-service. And even if you're in a small library where you think people don't want self-checkout, I am here to tell you that that you need to plan for it, even if it's not something you want to implement now. If you're doing any kind of renovation or reconfiguration, plan for that in the future, because the younger generation of people expect self-service, they expect automation, and they will be looking for these things in the future. So these are just a few examples of things. The upper left is obviously a self-check machine. They do not have to take up a lot of space. This is a tabletop model, and it's fairly compact. The lobby lockers that are shown on the upper right are one of my favorite things, because the way I use libraries is I put things on hold from home and I run in and pick them up and check them out at the self-check machine. That's the kind of library user I am. And I'm often frustrated by the fact that I can't get to the library when it's open. And these lobby lockers, or I've seen them installed on the exterior wall of a library also. These are places where hold materials can be placed in a locker. A code is emailed to the patron and they can pick it up whenever they can get to that self-service locker. The one on the lower right is a book vending machine. These things are more often seen in larger cities, but they can be really effective in places like train stations, airports, supermarkets, places where people tend to go, and you can provide a library presence in a place where it's fairly unexpected, and you can really build your patron base that way by popping up in an unexpected and well-used location. And the photo on the lower left is an actual self-service library where a patron uses their library card to access the space. More often, mostly these are small portions of a larger library area, and this unstaffed section is open more hours than the staffed portion of the library. Or these can also be seen in remote locations, towns way out in a rural area, and in that case they would have a sort of a hotline. They would have a phone that would connect you to a librarian on the other end who can help you if you're having a problem. These are fairly controversial and have not seen a lot of implementation, but I know they're being used in Ontario, Canada. They're being used in Georgia, and they're widely used in Western Europe. All right. So it has been shown that it's a fact. Research shows that materials that are displayed face out are more likely to be checked out by a significant margin than traditional shelves with spine out shelving. So finding a place to do face out display, it's a space hog, but it's an important thing to think about. So these are some ways that you can find face out display space without taking up too much space. The one on the upper left is those display rails. It's like 3 inches deep. It's some library had a local woodworker who was willing to build these displays for them. There are a couple of examples on this page of mobile display units, so you can move it to the place where you want to display the materials. The one in the center bottom is a display unit that was carved out underneath the stairs. So a space that is typically not usable for much and can often be a head bashing hazard, can be repurposed as a display space. And that's the end of my formal presentation. Oh, look, we only have 5 minutes for questions. I'm so sorry. But I would be happy to take questions. I do want to say that I have made my slides available to the Wild Wisconsin people, so they will be available to you. But I also want to tell you that all of this material that I've said today is available on a LibGuide, and the URL is right there in red on the left. And I also have thousands of photographs of library spaces on my Pinterest board, so feel free to look at them. So questions quickly, any?
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. That was great. Paula says awesome pictures and suggestions, so thank you for that. And Carla asks, do you recommend or have any suggestions for large companies for library furniture?
Well, I have to say that it's kind of regional. I know the ones in Massachusetts. I don't know the ones in Wisconsin. And I would say, do you have a state bid list? I know in Massachusetts, you know, we have very strict procurement laws here, and there are several library vendors on the state bid list, and so you don't have to go through the bidding process. You can just go directly to them.
Oh,
The ones
interesting.
that I know of are Tucker and Demco. Those are the
Okay.
kind of the biggies.
Yes, and Demco is in Wisconsin, so
Yeah.
they're just actually just not too far from where I am right now. And Carla, so maybe checking with your library system, they probably have someone there who can tell you that. I'm not sure about a bid list, but we can, I can ask one of my colleagues who is our building person to see if there's a place like that that we can recommend. So
Great.
Thanks, Carla. Kelly asks, we recently purchased some small roundish ottomans for our teen area, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on beanbag chairs. We would only have room for about 2 or maybe 3.
Well, I think beanbag chairs are great in teen rooms, especially because kids like them. My only hesitation is that they tend to not be that durable. You have to really get a high-end beanbag chair or it's going to disintegrate fairly quickly. But I don't have, I think ottomans are great because they're easy to move around. My experience with teen rooms is what kids like is stuff that they can move around and reconfigure the space and, you know, gather into groups or go spread them apart into individual spaces. So anything that's easy to move around and that the kids can reconfigure themselves is, I think, a great choice.
Excellent, thank you. And we are at 9:58. If you have, we can probably take 1 or maybe 2 more questions if they come in. Otherwise, in the meantime, if you're still typing, I will let you know that the recording and slides will be available on the Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference page later today. Recording might be tomorrow. We'll see. It'll be either later today or tomorrow. And I'm not seeing any other questions come in. I'll wait just a second.
I do want to say that my email is right there on the screen, and it will be on the slides and in the LibGuide. I encourage you to contact me. I don't discriminate against Wisconsin people. I will do my very best to answer any questions that you have. This is my passion, and I love to spread it around. So anything you'd like to ask me, I'll do my best to answer.
Thank you. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and close it out today. So thank you so much, Lauren, for this great session and all this great information.
Thank you.